They mapped the heavens with an accuracy our vaunted Renaissance science would not match for 1,000 years. They conceived of the number zero, a revolutionary leap in abstract thought on their own. In an era when Europe's greatest cities were little more than muddy villages, they engineered sprawling metropolises of stone, housing hundreds of thousands. They timed their wars to the dance of the planets and claimed to speak with the gods. And then, in the popular imagination, they vanished. A ghost civilization swallowed by the jungle, leaving behind only silent, enigmatic ruins. This is the lie we have agreed upon. The truth, however, is not a story of a sudden, inexplicable collapse. It is the story of transformation, of survival against impossible odds, and of a cultural legacy that has never been broken. It is a 9,000-year epic that holds within it urgent lessons about climate change, political polarization, societal fragility, and the enduring power of the human spirit. This is not the story of how the Maya fell. This is the story of why they never truly left.
Welcome to Secrets of the Ancients, where ancient mysteries awaken.
To understand the Maya, you have to forget our modern notions of progress. You have to unlearn the idea that history is a straight line and relentless march from primitive to complex. Their story doesn't begin with a king's decree or a prophet's vision. It begins in the mud and the muck of a world just emerging from the last ice age, with a partnership, a cosmic bargain struck between a wandering people and a wild, unpromising grass. Imagine Mesoamerica 7,000 years before Christ. The great mammoths and saber-toothed cats are gone, but their ghosts haunt the memory of the hunter-gatherer bands that roam the land. This is a world of bewildering abundance and sudden peril. The highlands are a jagged spine of volcanoes, while the lowlands are a green labyrinth, a rainforest so dense it creates its own weather. For these nomadic peoples, time is a flowing river, measured in the migration of herds and the ripening of wild fruits. Their world is horizontal, a constant journey across a landscape that is provider and predator in equal measure. Then they begin a dialogue, not with words but with actions carried out over centuries. They focus their attention on a scraggly grass called teosinte. To our eyes, it's a weed. Its seeds are few, tiny, and locked in a shell as hard as a pebble. There were far easier plants to gather, but in a stroke of genius, or perhaps patient desperation, these ancient people saw a flicker of potential. They began to select, to cultivate, to nurture. This wasn't farming as we know it. This was humanity's first great leap of genetic faith. Generation after generation, they chose the plants with slightly larger kernels, with slightly thinner shells, slowly, painstakingly, coaxing a new creation into existence. They were not simply domesticating a plant, they were co-creating a new life form. They were midwifing the birth of maize, and maize, in return, reshaped the human soul. Unlike the wheat of the Fertile Crescent, which can be sown and largely left to its own devices, maize is a needy, demanding partner. It cannot sow its own seeds. It depends entirely on a human hand to shuck its husk and plant its kernels. This intimate, codependent relationship became the central metaphor for the Maya universe. It established a powerful philosophy of reciprocity. Life is not given, it is earned. The cosmos is not a machine that runs on its own. It is a living entity that demands active, conscious participation. To receive the gift of maize, you had to give your labor, your attention, your devotion. The universe demanded a price. This profound idea, that survival is a cyclical, sacred transaction, would become the operating system of their entire civilization. By 2000 BC, this bargain allows for an anchor. The nomadic wandering slows, then stops. The first permanent villages appear, thatched roof houses clustered around the vibrant green fields of maize. This is a monumental shift in human consciousness. When you stop moving, your relationship with the land changes. It's no longer just a territory to be passed through, it becomes home. A specific cenote, one of those deep, water-filled sinkholes, isn't just a place to drink. It can become a portal to the underworld. A particular mountain isn't just a landmark. It can become the abode of an ancestor god. The landscape itself becomes sacred, a canvas onto which they begin to paint their cosmology. Time itself is reimagined. It's no longer the hunter's linear path, but the farmer's recurring circle. The planting, the tending, the harvest, the decay, and the rebirth. But these burgeoning Maya villages were not alone on the world stage. Down on the Gulf Coast, a mysterious and formidable culture was already in its prime, the Olmec. We call them the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and for good reason. They were the giants of the age, carving colossal stone heads with enigmatic expressions, building the first pyramids, and developing the first writing in the Americas. When Olmec merchants traveled the jungle trade routes, they carried more than just polished jade, sharp obsidian, and exotic feathers. They carried a revolutionary new software for organizing society. They brought with them the blueprint for power. Imagine being an early Maya villager, seeing these traders arrive with goods from a world away. They bring with them concepts that are both terrifying and seductive. The idea that a single ruler is not just a chief, but a divine being, a shaman who can travel between the earthly plane and the spirit world. They bring the concept of a universe with four corners and a sacred center. And they bring the calendar, a 260-day ritual cycle that suggests time is not just a season, but a sacred mathematical code. Here is where the Maya genius for synthesis first ignites. They do not simply copy the Olmec model. They absorb it, they wrestle with it, and they make it their own. They take the Olmec concept of the divine ruler and they merge it with their own foundational philosophy of maize. The king, the Ajo, becomes the ultimate guarantor of the maize cycle. His own body is the conduit through which the cosmic energy flows to fertilize the fields. His personal bloodletting rituals are the ultimate act of reciprocity, feeding the gods to ensure the survival of his people. They took the Olmec calendars and supercharged them, weaving the 260-day cycle together with a 365-day solar calendar and the mind-bendingly vast long count, a system that could pinpoint any day within a cycle of over 5,000 years. They weren't just telling time, they were mapping eternity, placing their own human story within the grand, repeating architecture of the cosmos. This is the key. The early Maya were not a blank slate. They were brilliant curators of ideas, taking foreign concepts and grounding them so deeply in their own unique worldview that they became something new, something more powerful. It's a crucial lesson in cultural dynamics, how to engage with a powerful outside influence without being consumed by it. They established a pattern that would define them for the next 3,000 years, an unwavering cultural core clothed in a genius for adaptation. The foundation was now set. Upon this bedrock of maize, cyclical time, and borrowed gods, they were ready to build a universe. For thousands of years, the rhythm of life was the rhythm of the village. But around 1000 BC, a new pulse begins to beat in the heart of the jungle. It's the sound of thousands of people living together for the first time, a sound that generates unprecedented energy and unprecedented problems. This is the moment a culture decides to scale up. It's a gamble, a high-stakes experiment in a new way of being human. They were beta testing civilization itself, and the results would echo for eternity. At sites like Nakb in the lowlands of Guatemala, we see this experiment taking physical form. The architecture is no longer communal, it's monumental. Massive stone platforms rise from the forest floor, plastered and painted, stark white against the jungle green. These aren't just bigger houses. They are the physical manifestation of a new idea, hierarchy. Building them required a level of planning and labor coercion that village life could never support. This raises the fundamental question of complexity. When thousands of people who are not all kin live in one place, who keeps the peace? Who manages the food surplus? Who convinces thousands of individuals to dedicate their lives to hauling stone for a common project? The Maya answer to this challenge was a stroke of political and religious genius. They invented the god-king. This wasn't a king in the European sense, a monarch who rules by divine right. This was something far more profound. The Agio, or Holy Lord, was conceived as a human axis mundi, the world tree made flesh. He was the living conduit connecting the three layers of their cosmos, the watery underworld of Xibalba, our Middle-earth, and the celestial realm of the gods. He wasn't just in charge of the city, he was the city's cosmic heart. His health was the city's health. His ritual actions were not mere ceremony, they were critical maintenance work for the entire universe. When he danced in a trance state, he was keeping the heavens in order. When he pierced his own body to let blood, he was repaying the cosmic debt, feeding the gods to ensure the sun would rise again. He was his people's chief shaman, their five-star general, and the living embodiment of their most important deity, the maize god. In a world without police forces or prisons, this ideology was the ultimate tool of social control. You didn't just obey the king, you obeyed the very structure of reality. And if the king was the spiritual engine, the city of El Mirador was the staggering machine he built. Rising out of the swamps around 600 BC, El Mirador was a true megalopolis, a ghost city on a scale that still beggars belief. At its peak, it may have housed over 100,000 people, a population rivaling that of ancient Rome. Its downtown core was a sprawling expanse of plazas, palaces, and causeways, all dominated by two colossal pyramid complexes. The larger, named La Danta, wasn't just a pyramid. It was a man-made mountain. The Maya built a massive foundational platform, acres wide, and then constructed a series of temples on top of it, rising some 230 feet into the sky. It remains one of the largest ancient structures in the world. Picture the scene, the air thick with the smoke of cooking fires and the sweet, cloying scent of copal incense. The constant chatter of tens of thousands in the marketplace, bartering for salt, obsidian, and cacao beans that served as currency. And always, the rhythmic chanting and the chipping of stone from the construction projects, the sound of a civilization literally raising the ground to meet its gods. This was an expression of power so absolute, so confident, it's hard for us to grasp. They achieved this with no beasts of burden, no wheeled vehicles, and no metal tools. It was accomplished with human muscle, sweat, and an unwavering belief in the vision of their leaders. To cement this vision, the god-kings of the preclassic period wielded a third powerful tool, the written word. Early hieroglyphs appear on stelae and public buildings, and their purpose is clear: propaganda. In a pre-literate society, writing is a form of magic, a secret code known only to the elite scribes and nobles. It gave rulers the power to literally write their own history. A king could commission a monument that traced his lineage back to a mythical hero, fabricating a divine mandate for his rule. He could record a minor skirmish as a world-altering cosmic battle, with himself at the center. Writing divorced history from fallible human memory and set it in stone. It became the ultimate instrument of legitimacy, a way to make political claims appear to be timeless, objective truths, a tactic that has hardly changed in the age of digital media and state-sponsored news. But this spectacular world was built on a fragile foundation. The model was a victim of its own success. Around 100 AD, a silence begins to fall over El Mirador. Construction halts. The bustling plazas empty. Within a few generations, the greatest city in the Americas is reclaimed by the jungle. This wasn't a mysterious vanishing act. It was a systems collapse, and it offers a chillingly familiar warning. The causes were likely a perfect storm of factors. Think of the environmental cost of a city like El Mirador. The deforestation required to feed that many people would have been immense. But more than that, to create the lime plaster that coated their temples, they had to burn vast quantities of limestone, which required burning even vaster quantities of green wood. They were spending their environmental capital at an unsustainable rate, likely triggering localized climate change and soil degradation. The very system that fed their people and glorified their gods was poisoning the land they depended on. Add to this the immense social strain. Did the populace, after centuries of backbreaking labor, simply reach its limit? Did they tire of the endless demands of god-kings whose rituals were perhaps no longer bringing the rains? In the end, they may have simply walked away, abandoning the monumental centers for a simpler, more sustainable life in the villages. The first great chapter of Maya urbanism was over, but this was not an ending. It was a violent, chaotic course correction. The preclassic world had become too centralized, too top-heavy. Its collapse was a decentralizing event, a shattering of a monolithic model that scattered the population, and with it, the accumulated knowledge of the last 1,000 years. These scattered seeds of culture, the calendar, the writing system, the ideology of divine kingship, would soon take root in new, more fertile ground, setting the stage for the even more spectacular florescence of the classic period. The silence in the jungle was only temporary. If the preclassic was the Maya learning to build a world, the classic period is the moment that world catches fire. It is a supernova of cultural energy, a golden age of 6 centuries where art, science, and political ambition fused to create the most sophisticated civilization the Americas had ever known. The seeds scattered by the fall of El Mirador did not just sprout. They grew into a forest of competing giants, each reaching for the heavens. This new era was defined by a rivalry on a scale that was unprecedented. In the south of the Petane rainforest, the old money dynasty of Tikal rose again, its skyscraper-like temples clawing their way above the jungle canopy, monuments of raw power and ancient lineage. To the north, the ambitious newcomer Calakmul, the kingdom of the snake, began to build its own empire, not just with stone, but with cunning diplomacy. What unfolded between these two superpowers was a Mesoamerican Cold War, a grand game of cosmic chess played for the soul of their civilization. This was not a conflict of simple, head-on battles. It was a tangled web of proxy wars, espionage, and political theater. The kings of Tikal and Calakmul backed smaller cities against each other, turning the entire region into a network of client states and shifting allegiances. A royal marriage was not a matter of love. It was a calculated geopolitical merger, sending a princess from one court to another to serve as a diplomat, a spy, and the mother of a future ruler with a claim to both thrones. They waged economic warfare, attempting to control the flow of precious jade from the south and critical obsidian from the highlands. Every small kingdom was forced to choose a side, to align with the jaguar of Tikal or the serpent of Calakmul, knowing that the wrong choice could mean annihilation. And at the heart of this conflict was a terrifying and uniquely Maya concept, the Star War. Imagine the court astronomers, the priest-scientists, hunched over their bark paper books, their faces lit by torchlight. They are not merely stargazers, they are military advisors. They track the movements of the planets with breathtaking precision, waiting for one celestial event in particular. The moment the planet Venus, after being hidden by the sun's glare, reappears in the dawn sky. For the Maya, Venus was not the goddess of love. It was a terrifying war god, a harbinger of violence and destruction. When the astronomer priests confirmed the date, the king would proclaim a Tan Chn Wen, a star war. This was the ultimate psychological operation. To march into battle under the gaze of Venus was to have the cosmos itself as your ally. It transformed a mere political conflict into a sacred mandate, a reenactment of the mythological battles of the gods. It was a declaration that this was no ordinary war. This was a cleansing, a cosmic reordering, and your enemy was not just fighting an army, but destiny itself. While the superpowers bled each other dry, other cities cultivated their own forms of greatness. In the highlands of what is now Honduras, Capan flourished, becoming the Athens of the Maya world. Its rulers invested less in military conquest and more in artistic and intellectual supremacy. They carved sculptures with a near-photographic realism and a psychological depth that is stunning. Their masterpiece, the hieroglyphic stairway, is the dynasty's stone-carved autobiography, a meticulously detailed history designed to prove their legitimacy to gods and men, an unparalleled work of art and propaganda. Further west, nestled in the misty foothills of Chiapas, the city of Palenque became an architectural jewel box under its greatest king, Inish Janab Pakal. Pakal was a master of public relations and legacy building. He reigned for an astonishing 68 years, transforming Palenque into a vision of elegance. But his ultimate achievement was his own tomb. Discovered deep within the Temple of the Inscriptions, his sarcophagus is a testament to the sheer audacity of the god-king ideology. The famous lid carving is not a portrait, it is his resurrection plan. It depicts Pakal at the moment of death, falling into the skeletal jaws of the underworld, but at the same time, he is sprouting from a maize kernel, being reborn as the eternal maize god. It is the most powerful and explicit claim of personal divinity ever carved in stone. This was an age of pure intellectual firepower. They independently conceived of the number 0, a leap into abstraction that is the bedrock of higher mathematics. This wasn't just a party trick. Their positional number system allowed them to handle massive figures, essential for their astronomical calculations. Their calendars were a symphony of interlocking cycles, the 260-day sacred almanac, the 365-day solar year, and the sweeping long count, that allowed them to track time with a complexity and precision unmatched in the world until the modern era. And they were master engineers. To sustain their gleaming cities in a rainforest with no major rivers, they sculpted the very landscape. They built vast systems of reservoirs, dams, and canals that captured and stored millions of gallons of rainwater, turning the liability of the seasonal deluge into the asset that saw them through the brutal dry season. It was climate adaptation on a monumental scale, the life support system that made their golden age possible. Yet, even at the height of this splendor, the system was running at red line. The art itself tells a story. On late classic monuments, the imagery becomes more and more militaristic. Kings are no longer depicted as serene shamans communing with gods, but as brutal warriors, standing triumphantly over bound, humiliated, and terrified captives. The propaganda was getting louder, more desperate. The population was booming, and the endless construction and warfare were putting an unsustainable strain on the land. The very success of the classic period, its dense populations, its magnificent cities, its intense political competition, was stretching the environmental and social fabric to its breaking point. The glorious cosmos they had built on Earth was a beautiful, intricate machine, but it was overheating, and it was about to blow. There is no single moment when a golden age ends. It dies by 1,000 cuts. The unraveling of the classic Maya world began not with the thunder of a conquering army, but with the silence of a cloudless sky. It started with the subtle signs of a system under intolerable stress. The maize stalks growing a little shorter each year, the water level in the great city reservoirs dropping below the marks of living memory, the growing desperation in the prayers and rituals of kings whose promises were turning to dust. This was not a sudden event. It was a slow, agonizing death spiral, a cautionary tale so profound and so relevant that it feels like a dispatch from our own possible future. The term collapse is too clean, too simple. What happened in the southern lowlands was a catastrophic systems failure, a perfect storm where a century-long megadrought crashed headlong into a civilization that had already been weakened by its own self-inflicted wounds. The main driver, the engine of the catastrophe, was climate change. We know this now. The evidence is written in the layers of mud on lake beds and in the mineral deposits of deep caves. These natural archives don't lie. They speak of a series of punishing, multi-decade droughts that began around 820 AD, a period of climatic violence unlike anything the region had seen in 1,000 years. For a civilization built on the cosmic bargain that the king's piety would guarantee the generosity of the rain god, Chak, this was not just an agricultural problem. It was a spiritual and political apocalypse. Imagine the escalating terror in the hearts of the people as they watched their god-kings perform ever more frantic, ever more bloody rituals of sacrifice on the temple summits, only for the sky to remain a brazen, indifferent blue. The contract at the heart of their world was broken. The gods, it seemed, had gone silent, but the drought was just the trigger. The gun was already loaded. For centuries, the Maya had been writing checks against their environmental bank account. By 800 AD, that account was empty. The great cities, with their massive populations, had an insatiable hunger for wood, for fuel, for construction, and most critically, to superheat limestone into the fine white plaster that coated their monumental buildings. They had leveled vast tracts of the rainforest. We now know that this kind of wholesale deforestation can create its own weather, as the bare, sun-baked earth reflects heat and actively pushes rain clouds away. They had inadvertently terraformed their own lands into a more efficient drought machine. Their ecological debt had come due. Into this brittle, thirsty landscape poured the accelerant of endemic warfare. The elegant, cosmically timed Star Wars of earlier centuries had devolved into something far uglier and more desperate. As resources dwindled, the conflicts between cities became wars of annihilation. This was no longer about capturing a rival king for a glorious sacrifice. This was about survival. Armies now practiced a scorched earth strategy, deliberately burning the cornfields of their enemies, smashing their reservoirs, and destroying the infrastructure of life itself. They were not just killing each other, they were killing the land. The very political system that had driven them to such spectacular heights was now locked in a feedback loop of mutually assured destruction. And this is when the system breaks from the inside. The social contract that held society together, the promise of security and sustenance in exchange for labor and loyalty, evaporated. A farmer, watching his family starve, looks up at the gleaming white temple and no longer sees a sacred mountain. He sees a monument to a failed elite. We find the archaeological evidence for this moment of reckoning. In city after city, we see the scorch marks of intense fires not on the temples, but in the private quarters of the palaces. We see royal tombs ripped open and desecrated. This isn't the work of a foreign invader who would have looted the temples first. This is the fury of a people turning on their own failed leadership. This was revolution born of hunger and disillusionment. Try to imagine what it was like for a family in a city like Tikal in those final years. The decision to leave was not made lightly. It was an admission of defeat, a severing of ties to generations of ancestors buried beneath your family compound. It was abandoning the only world you had ever known. We see it in the haunting archaeological record of houses abandoned in haste, with valuable pottery and grinding stones left on the floor. These are the footprints of a refugee crisis. They packed what little maize they had left and they voted with their feet, walking away from the silent stone giants and heading north, toward the coast, toward the highlands, anywhere that still had water. The great cities of the south did not vanish. They bled out, family by family, until there was nothing left but the ghosts. But the Maya people did not vanish. They survived. What collapsed was a specific political model in a specific region, the glorious, top-heavy, and ultimately unsustainable model of the southern god kings. It was a traumatic and violent pruning of a branch of the Maya tree that could no longer support its own weight. This catastrophe wiped the chessboard clean. It ended the centuries-long rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul and created a power vacuum. This chaos was also an opening, a brutal but necessary clearing of the ground that would allow new leaders, new ideas, and new, more resilient forms of society to rise from the ashes. The story was not over. It was simply moving to a new chapter in a new land. As the great cities of the South crumbled into silence, the story of the Maya did not end. It migrated. The center of gravity shifted north to the flat, scrubby, and unforgiving landscape of the Yucatan Peninsula. This is a land without rivers, a world dependent on the sacred, water-filled sinkholes called cenotes for life itself. A different land demands a different kind of people, and the civilization that rose here was tougher, leaner, and more worldly than its classic period predecessor. If the classic Maya were the high-minded philosopher kings obsessed with the dance of eternity, the post-classic Maya were the hard-nosed survivors, the merchants, and the warriors. This was not a decline. It was a renaissance of pragmatism. Out of the chaos of the collapse, a new titan emerged, the city of Chichen Itza. This was not just another Maya capital. It was a cosmopolitan, Mesoamerican melting pot. Its rise coincides with stories of outsiders arriving from the West, warrior merchants who brought with them the language and ideology of the powerful Toltec civilization of central Mexico. This fusion of Maya tradition and Toltec militarism created something new and terrifying. You can see it in the art and architecture. The familiar masks of the Maya rain god, Chak, now share temple walls with rows of stone skulls impaled on racks and feathered serpents devouring human hearts. It was a new, brutal visual language of power designed to awe and intimidate. Chichen Itza was a commercial empire. Its power came not from the king's sacred bloodline alone, but from its control of the coastal salt flats, the most valuable commodity in the ancient world, and the sea trade routes that snaked around the peninsula. Its most iconic structure, the Pyramid of El Castillo, is dedicated to Kukulkan, the Maya name for the Toltec feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl. This was a significant shift. They were worshipping an international deity, a patron of merchants and rulers across Mesoamerica, a clear signal of the city's global ambitions. Nowhere is the city's ethos more apparent than in its great ball court. It is a gargantuan space, larger than a modern football field, and engineered with such acoustic perfection that a whisper at one end can be heard at the other. This was not a stadium for simple sport. It was a political theater and a religious crucible. The carved panels on its walls tell a grim story. The game was a sacred drama, a reenactment of cosmic battles and the losing captain, or perhaps the winner, in the ultimate act of sacrifice, was decapitated on the spot. It was the Super Bowl, a high mass, and a political summit all rolled into one violent, spectacular event. But even Chichen Itza's dominance faded, and in its wake, the Maya tried another new political experiment. They had seen the fragility of the God-King model and the risks of a single, all-powerful capital. The city of Mayapan rose to lead a confederation, a league of allied city-states. This was a messier, more fractious system, a government by council where powerful families like the Kakam and the Ziu schemed and vied for influence. It was less divinely ordained and more nakedly political, but it was also more resilient, maintaining a delicate balance of power across the northern Yucatan for over 200 years. This post-classic world was constantly in motion. Great seagoing canoes, some carrying dozens of men and tons of cargo, plied the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, trading in honey, cotton, and cacao. The intellectual traditions were still vibrantly alive, not carved on giant stone monuments, but painted in beautiful, intricate glyphs on bark paper books we call codices. In these fragile documents, they recorded their prophecies, their astronomical tables, and their histories, a testament to a culture that refused to forget who it was. Then, in the year 1511, a story that no codex could have predicted began to unfold. A Spanish caravel caught in a hurricane was smashed to pieces on a reef. A handful of survivors washed ashore. They were the first Europeans to set foot in the Maya world, and they were not seen as conquerors, but as strange, pale, and pathetic curiosities. The fates of two of these men tell the whole story of the collision of worlds that was to come. 1. A friar named Geronimo de Aguilar clung fiercely to his Spanish identity, learning the local language but counting the days until he could be rescued. The other, a soldier named Gonzalo Guerrero, did the opposite. He went native. He assimilated completely, tattooing his face, taking a noble Maya woman as his wife, and fathering the first mestizo children in the Americas. He became a respected war captain, and when the Spanish finally arrived in force, he would lead Maya warriors against his former countrymen. He is a haunting figure, a testament to the powerful draw of a culture the Spanish were determined to destroy. When Hernán Cortés and other conquistadors arrived a few years later, the Maya fought back with tactical brilliance, using the jungle terrain to neutralize the Spanish advantages of horses and steel. But the Spaniards had an invisible and far more terrible ally. It moved ahead of their armies, a silent, unstoppable plague. Smallpox. It was a biological holocaust, a great dying that swept through the population with horrifying speed, killing up to 90% of the people in some areas. Imagine the terror. A disease that your healers could not cure, that your gods could not stop, a pestilence that seemed to spare the invaders. It was this demographic collapse, more than any battle, that ultimately broke the back of organized resistance. Even so, the Maya spirit was not extinguished. Deep in the Petén rainforest, the Itza kingdom of Teyezel, built on an island in Lake Petén Itza, remained an independent, unconquered Maya stronghold. For 200 years after the first contact, it stood as a final beacon of the old world, a defiant last stand against the inevitable. It would not fall until 1697. The conquest was over, but the long, quiet war for survival was just beginning. When the last independent Maya kingdom of Teozcal fell in 1697, the Spanish thought the war was finally over. They were wrong. The war had just changed venues. It moved from the open battlefield to the battlefield of the soul. For the next 3 centuries, the Maya would wage a quiet, stubborn, and brilliant campaign of resistance, a war fought not with spears and arrows, but with memory, ritual, and an unbreakable will to remain themselves. The Spanish believed they had felled the great tree of Maya culture, but they had only hacked at the trunk. They failed to see the vast, ancient root system that remained alive and potent beneath the surface, ready to send up new shoots in the most unexpected of ways. The primary strategy in this long resistance was a brilliant act of spiritual camouflage we call syncretism. The Maya looked at the new religion being forced upon them and did not see a replacement for their beliefs, but a new vocabulary to express them. They became masters of the dual-track faith. On the surface, they were model Christian converts. They attended Mass, they were baptized, they revered the cross. But in the privacy of their homes and the secrecy of their sacred caves, the old ways continued. The Christian cross, to the Spanish, was a symbol of Christ's sacrifice. To the Maya, it was also the yax, the sacred ceiba tree, the world tree that stood at the center of the cosmos. They would pray to the Virgin Mary, but in their hearts, they might also be speaking to the ancient moon goddess or the spirits of the earth. They adopted the saints' feast days but scheduled them to align with their own traditional agricultural ceremonies. This wasn't a cynical deception. It was a sophisticated theological argument. They saw the sacred in all its forms and created a working synthesis that allowed their worldview to survive, hidden in plain sight, right under the noses of the friars. This intellectual resistance took written form as well. Using the alphabet the Spanish had taught them, Maya scribes began creating underground manuscripts, a samizdat for the colonized. These were the legendary books of Chilambalam. Written in Yucatec Maya, they are a bewildering and beautiful mix of prophecy, history, myth, and astronomical knowledge. They reinterpreted the conquest not as a final end, but as just one traumatic turn in the great, repeating cycle of time. They encoded their ancestral memory, and crucially, they prophesied a future day when the wheel would turn again and the Maya would rise. These books were not just records. They were manuals for hope, blueprints for cultural survival. And sometimes, the quiet resistance exploded into open flame. The most dramatic example was the caste war of Yucatan, which erupted in 1847. This was not a mere peasant revolt. It was a full-blown war for independence, fueled by centuries of oppression and inspired by a miraculous speaking cross, a potent fusion of Christian iconography and Maya prophetic tradition. The Maya rebels drove the European-descended population back into the walled cities and established an independent state, Chan Santa Cruz. For more than 50 years, they had their own government, their own military, and their own syncretic religion. They were a functioning, independent Maya nation in the modern era, a testament to an organizational and martial spirit that had never been extinguished. Which brings us to today. The story that began in the ancient cornfields now continues in the lives of more than 6 million people who identify as Maya. To say they survived is an understatement. They are here. Go to a highland market in Guatemala, and you are not in a museum. You are in a living nexus of culture. Listen to the music of the Kayich and Caxical languages, tongues as old and complex as any in Europe. Look at the vibrant colors of the women's huipiles, the traditional woven blouses. These are not just beautiful garments, they are living documents. Each village has its own design, a visual dialect that tells a story of its community's specific cosmology and history. A woman's clothing is her identity, her library, her connection to a deep and unbroken past. The modern Maya are fighting new battles. They are no longer fighting conquistadors, but they are fighting in courtrooms against international mining companies to protect their sacred hills. They are fighting in the halls of government for the right to a bilingual education, so their children can thrive in the modern world without being severed from their ancestral roots. They are at the absolute forefront of the global environmental movement. And this is perhaps the most powerful part of their unbroken story. The Maya are humanity's canaries in the coal mine. They have a 1,200-year-old memory of what a climate change-induced societal collapse looks like. It's not a theory to them, it's history. So when a Maya farmer practices traditional milpa agriculture, planting corn, beans, and squash together in a symbiotic system that enriches the soil instead of depleting it, he is not being primitive. He is practicing a form of deep ecology that modern science is only just beginning to appreciate. When a Maya leader stands before the United Nations and speaks about the sacredness of the forest, she is not speaking in metaphors. She is speaking from the core of a worldview that sees the natural world not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living partner in a cosmic bargain. The greatest mystery of the Maya was never their collapse. It was our own ignorance in ever thinking they were lost. They are not a ruin, they are a lesson in resilience, in adaptation, and in the profound truth that a culture is not made of stone. It is made of ideas. And ideas, when carried in the hearts of a people, are the most enduring things in the universe. The calendar turns, the ceremonies continue, and the story flows onward, not as an echo from a distant past, but as a living, breathing voice telling us about who we were and reminding us of what we might yet choose to become. The story of the Maya is not a tragedy of a lost people. It is the ultimate epic of resilience. It teaches us that a civilization is not just its monuments of stone. It is a system of knowledge, a language, a worldview. And while stones may crumble, a worldview can endure in the hearts and minds of a people. The Maya hold up a mirror to our own civilization. Their achievements challenge our arrogance, and their failures serve as a stark warning. Their sophisticated understanding of astronomy reminds us that there are many forms of science. Their catastrophic collapse reminds us that our own complex society is fragile, and our relationship with the environment is not one we can afford to neglect. Their centuries of resistance remind us that the human spirit has a profound capacity to endure. The calendar turns, the ceremonies continue, and the story flows onward. The echo of the ancient Maya is not silent. It is in the voices of their 6 million descendants, a living testament to the fact that time itself can be conquered, not through empire or technology, but through the simple, powerful act of never letting go. The greatest secret of the ancients is that they are still with us.